Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that interview with V.S. Naipaul, in which he speaks so reflectively on some of his work. We did that interview in 2006, and every time I look at it, I realize that it really was a remarkable interview from the point of view of how forthright he was, how sincere he was, and how fascinating that particular conversation was, because it was all about his book, his work, and he, the writer, in the middle of it. We have a wonderful guest today, Dr. Vijay Maharaj, and we are going to talk with her a little bit about Naipaul, about the film that we saw and the interview contained in it, and about other issues related to V.S. Naipaul. Could we welcome Dr. Maharaj, please? Dr. Maharaj, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you.
Say hello to our listeners and viewers. We are on MCTV and we are on U97.5 radio. And you have a good audience this morning.
Okay, that's wonderful to know, because I can't tell what the audience is, but I'm very pleased to be here. And I'm looking forward to our chat this morning, because today is Naipaul's birthday, and I don't think we should have allowed that to pass without some reflection on what he means to us, locally, regionally, as well as internationally. So I'm very, very pleased to be here with you this morning, and hello to all listeners and viewers.
Okay, well, I'll let you do most of the talking. And today Naipaul would have been, what, 89? He died at the age of 86. And I mean, he had a remarkable career in the 54 or 55 years of his writing. He actually produced 31 books. I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment. And he had multivarious interviews with people here, there, and everywhere. Sometimes he would be very frustrated by the interviews. Naipaul used to get very angry in the interviews when he realized that people were trying to figure out things about him without reading his books. He used to get furious, you know.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about Naipaul from your perspective, and his significance and value to Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and the world.
Right. So I think that from the local perspective, we often look at Naipaul as being, one of us, and his accomplishments are therefore reflective of who we are and what we are capable of doing. So, for example, the book that came out of the symposium that you did in 2007 for the University of the West Indies recognition of all of the Nobel Prize winners in the Caribbean was called Raised in the West Indies, because we were claiming him. In a sense, the Lines of Life website, which you mentioned at the beginning of this morning's program, is also making an attempt to claim. But Naipaul is not just one of us. He has gone out there and he has done things. He has written about things. He has looked at things. He has fashioned literature in such a way that I think that more than just what he means to us, we need to recognize what he means to everybody, what he means to the world, what he has given, why it's important to continue to know what he has said, why it is important to know what others have said about him, and how to contextualize that. So again, with the Lines of Life website, I'm hoping it will be far more than a gesture that I am making myself, and that it will be claimed in a big way. Because, of course, my work time is finite, but I see the project of us recognizing the value of Naipaul's work as being a very long-term kind of project that goes way beyond anything that I am capable of doing. So that the site is attempting to be a comprehensive, to provide in one spot a comprehensive grasp of what has been said about Naipaul and what Naipaul himself has said and what our current batches of students are saying about him. So that I think that Naipaul is one of the foremost thinkers of the post-colonial period. He has reflected widely on colonialism and the effects of colonialism, the long-term effects of colonialism. The very act of writing makes us more aware, so that what Naipaul did with his books is something that is available, and not one thing, many things. They are all available for our current batch of students, for budding writers, for people to look at and to follow, because these works are heavily researched, they are intense pieces of work, they are deep, and I think that to reflect on the film a little bit, I think that the interview that you did helped us to know a little bit more about how he himself viewed that process of development and how all of the books fit with each other. Because very often, as you said, people have spoken to him, and when he realizes that they don't know about his work, it has been very upsetting for him, because you need to know. You need to know.
So
And the film does that. It gives you.
So tell me a little bit about your website. How can someone access it, and what is the conception behind the website, and what do you hope to achieve from it? I know you've mentioned some of the things for students, and what it will be kind of a repository of information about what people have written and said about him and about his own work. But talk about it a little bit.
Right. So what we were hoping to achieve, so the project began in 2018 when he died. So that was the 11th of August, and we wanted to do something in the department right away. And his birthday was 6 days later, so that seemed to be just the ideal time. Within those 6 days, however, numerous calls, numerous requests for statements about him. And what also became clear was that that information was dispersed. It was quite disparate. You know, you had people saying this and people saying that, and many other things that didn't make for a whole picture. So that the website developed naturally out of those requests from the public. So it's a lot like the films that you have done, and it's a lot like many things that have been done in the Caribbean. For example, BIM, Kaiko Overall, and many of the early journals. JWIL started off in the same way, where you are attempting to talk, and Small Axe is also doing it with the variety of work that they're accepting, where you're attempting to reach the general public. It's just like this program, for example. You are attempting to reach the general public, intelligent people who are not particularly scholars in literature, and you want them to know the value of the work that has been done, and you want them to get as comprehensive a picture as possible in order to be able to understand that. I have been very, very lucky that I've had students who are committed to the work as well, and I need to acknowledge them here. So you can get to the site just by typing in Lines of Life. If you just do Lines of Life, it's going to come up. But if you do Lines of Life Naipaul, which is the whole name of the site, linesoflifenaipaul.com, it's going to come up immediately. But it's also available on the departmental website under the research link. So we have a number of this kind of research that we're doing, podcasts and other web-based research. And this site is also available through there. so that it's easily available for students and others. But the university website is, anybody can enter it. And once you go to the DLCCS link, you will see the website under research. So you just go in there and the whole thing is available.
Okay.
And of course, also,
Go ahead.
should I go ahead?
I stopped.
Yes.
Yes.
So what also came out of the building of the website, and I'm very grateful to Intelligent Applications and Ryan Singh and now Christopher Miller, who has joined us in developing the site. What also happened is that when you saw the breadth of the scholarship on Naipaul and how much of it was not widely available, it seemed necessary to put it together. So Bloomsbury accepted the task. Many people accepted, in fact, to participate in the entire thing. And out of the research that the team keeps on doing to keep the website developing, every year we do a new 7 books and all the material on the 7. We are now at the 21st, and we keep on developing and expanding into different areas. And one of the things that we recognized is that this amount of material needed to be collated, and we accepted the offer from Bloomsbury, and one book will come out each year in a series of books on these recent essays that show Naipaul in a variety of the value of the work to a variety of fields. So that, for instance, in the upcoming book, you have people looking at how Naipaul in a free state makes so many statements that are pertinent to human rights issues. As you yourself recognize with the whole migration problem and the unhousing, which is something that Naipaul has looked at throughout his life. The problem of unhousing, the problems that come up when one tries to again be housed in a certain way, and how maybe housing is something that we need to reconceptualize, which is one of the most important themes that he has dealt with. So that's another important outcome of the website project.
Naipaul, I think, felt an anxiety of being displaced, of not having a home, of being what you might call, to use Biswas's word in the book, unaccommodated. And therefore he's very sensitive to the issue of human displacement, migration. You find yourself without a passport, you lost, you don't know what is happening, you have no direction. I think this is a great source of anxiety that emanates in his work all the time, and I think it comes from him.
Do you? Because you see, that's what I'm saying. That I think that it was in him, but it's also a condition in the world.
Yes.
So that for people who do experience being housed, I don't think, and he keeps on saying that as well, that I'm not sure that people who have the experience of being unhoused are readily understood by those who have not had that experience. And that's why he keeps on saying that, you need to look at the problems of quote-unquote half-made societies in a particular kind of way, because these issues have not been sufficiently represented for them to be as well understood as they should be in order to move forward. So I don't know that it's only an anxiety in him. Yes, it's an anxiety in him, but that anxiety is knitted into and that's why we continue to love his work. It's very, very representative of what people all around are feeling. And that anxiety is a shared anxiety. It's knitted into that thing all over the world.
But the anxiety makes for empathy, which is why he is able to speak to some of these issues of displacement, of isolation, of alienation, etc. But also the physical condition that comes with it, because it is something that is in his consciousness. And when he sees it, he recognizes it. I, um, I always remember the phrase from House of Mr. Biswas that, Biswas talks about, the narrator talks about the fact that Biswas was a destitute writing about other destitutes, So, I mean, the
So often
consciousness
the
is
case in
there.
our societies, yes.
Sorry?
As it's so often the case in our societies where the writer is thought to be separate from the issues and would reflect on it, as he said, in third person voice, but you are part of the issue.
Yes.
How do you then work out your position of authority within that situation when you are part of what is happening? And this is not participant observation at all. This goes way beyond that. It is to have lived it, to feel it with the people that you are writing about.
I was struck when I looked at the interview after it was over, when I looked at it the first time, after it was over, when I saw the film for the first time, I was struck by the fact that when I quoted the first sentence, the first few lines of A Bend in the River, the world is as it is. Those who are nothing, who allow themselves to be nothing, have no place in it. I could see, as I looked at the film, that Naipaul's face began to smile with a kind of almost a sense of, because, when he was talking about writing House of Mr. Biswas, he used his fingers because his memory had gone back and he was feeling it in his fingers. And so when I was talking to him and when I was repeating the words that he, in fact, had written as the spoken words of Salim in that particular book, I could see his memory going back somewhere and the smile coming to his face and the recognition of the fact that, maybe I could identify with those words that I've written in the mouth, so to speak, of Salim. How do you respond to something like that as a writer, responding to his own work in that way with a kind of recognition?
Well, you just have to accept it, right? Because as the writer, knowing in hindsight what he had done in the projection of his own views onto one of his characters, which all writers would have to do, right? Because you draw from your experience in order to write. So, it's impossible not to. You have to. What else can you draw on? If you're writing fantastic literature or sci-fi or whatever.
Yeah, if you create 2 or 3 characters, really it's all the things in your own head based on your experience or based on your interpretation that you are having them say. So it's like dimensions of yourself projected onto different elements of personality of self, but different characters that you create in a novel or in a play or something like that. So
I actually don't like this trend in some early criticism where a great deal of emphasis was placed on the relationship between the writer and what he has written, because I think that's true for every single writer.
Yes.
It's not peculiar to Naipaul.
Yeah, I know. I get the impression, from what he said in his interview, that he doesn't mind literary critics, as he says in one point. At one point, he says that they can be very helpful and they can help a writer to see what he's doing because he might not be conscious of it. But you get the feeling that he thinks a lot of literary critics are simply just barking up the wrong tree.
Yes.
Huh?
And he's probably quite right about that, right?
Yeah. So, the other thing, one of the things in the interview is that he says, apart from the fact that when Dr. Williams invited him here around independence time, or just prior to independence, to write what became the Middle Passage. Besides that, he had not really gotten any recognition, but that is not quite true, because in 1975 he received a doctorate from the University of the West Indies. In 1989 he got the Trinity Cross here in Trinidad and Tobago. I was a member of the government then, the Robinson government, and I remember when he came because he didn't come in the big ceremony, he came and he got the Trinity Cross on his own. When he came, I remember Prime Minister Robinson inviting him to his office, and he invited me also, and we had a conversation. And that recognition at that time, in the conversation, was very important to him because it was the first time he'd gotten that kind of national recognition. So he was honored by the University of the West Indies. He was honored here with a Trinity Cross. But I think that there is more that we can do to acknowledge his worth. When I look at what's happening with Lion House, for instance, I find that very disturbing, the deterioration. And I know Friends of Mr. Biswas has done a wonderful job with the house in Port of Spain. But really, we need to do something about Lion House as a country, as a nation, to preserve that legacy. I know that there are lots of, from my own investigation, and they're just cursory investigations, I think that the problem has to do with family and legalities and ownership and how you would get it done. But we really need to do that. Think of the significance to people coming to Trinidad and Tobago and knowing about V.S. Naipaul or knowing that he was a writer from here. And you are then able to take them to the house in, what's the name of the street? The name of the street in Port of Spain? In St. James?
Naipaul Street?
Huh?
Naipaul Street?
Yes, to take them to the house in Naipaul Street, and then to take them to the house on the main road there in Chaguanas. And it kind of completes the journey, because a house of Mr. Biswas talks about the children growing up there and Mr. Biswas suffocating there. And then, of course, that become the liberating opportunity for both Biswas and his family. And it's very real in the life of the Naipaul family itself. So those things can be very valuable, and I think we don't understand the value of these things, and the importance of legacy. What you are doing is very significant in terms of bringing it all together, using the technology and making Naipaulia, so to speak, available to an interested public. And that would be available to anybody in the world, wouldn't it?
Yes, anybody.
Okay, and that's the significance of online.
Contributed to
yes. Once you put it up online, anybody, anywhere in the world can access, but also anybody, anywhere in the world could seek to contribute. And therefore, you create a worldwide audience and a worldwide contributing community. And you create a worldwide community around Naipaul and his presence. And it's great that it's located at the St. Augustine campus. It's great that it's located in Trinidad and Tobago. But it's wonderful that the world now has access to it. So I want to commend you and congratulate you on that. What are your plans in terms of what you might do? You said you're going to try to produce a book every year, and that you're working on one now. And what are the other ideas you have in mind? I know you had Ngugi Watungo come,
Yes.
and he gave a talk on Naipaul and literature, etc. It's very good. I knew Ngugi Watungo when I was a young man as an undergraduate at Northwestern University, because he came as a visiting writer, and he taught African literature, and I took one of his courses. I got to know him then. But are you doing more things like that?
So the plan was that we would have an annual lecture.
Yeah.
So Boogie was the first, and that happened so nicely, where it was a simple question, just thrown out in the midst of conversation to him. I had gone to just chat because I happened to be close by, and he readily agreed to come. And he, despite the fact that it was many months between the visit and his coming, he kept his word. That was just given, and that was really, really so nice. And it happened during Carifest, and that made it even bigger for him because he took part in everything that the university was doing for Carifest that year as well, including going down to Port of Spain and participating. So the idea is that you have many people like Naipaul who have done theoretical work as well as literary work, and creative nonfiction as well as fiction. And we should have one such person talk about the value of this kind of work every year and do it in Naipaul's name. So it's a normal memorial style lecture from somebody in the field who is doing work that is similar to Naipaul. Of course, immediately after that first one in 2019, because that was when Moogie was here, we had the COVID situation. Everything else would have had to be done virtually, and the first year, Dr. Lovelace was supposed to come to the library to do it, but on the day of the event itself, he had a situation at home because the rains were very heavy and something had happened to his roof, and he couldn't make it. We thought we would do it during the course of the year, but that didn't happen. And for this year, well, it was as though the worsening situation with the pandemic also kind of like caught us up in the whirl of everything that has been happening in that regard. And that's why I'm so grateful that I'm here with you this morning, because had it not been for this, I wouldn't be doing anything that I hoped to do
Well,
for
we are
this
marking
particular thing.
his birthday, and we are taking note of his work and his value, which I think is
Yes.
a tribute
Yes.
to Naipaul and to our interest in it. And we are trying to also
Right.
generate the interest of other people in one of our great writers who have found
Yes.
recognition in the world. By the way,
Yes.
next week, I'm interviewing people and reflecting on the issue of independence and asking them to think about the future of Trinidad and Tobago in the kind of world, that uncertain world that we are living in now. And one of the people that I'm going to be talking to is Earl Lovelace. I had a nice chat with him, and he told me that he's working on his autobiography. So that would be a wonderful contribution. So we might ask him a word or two about that. But I'm going to have Earl here, and we're going to have to chat. Earl Lovelace and I go back a long way, because when I started at the University of the West Indies as a teaching assistant, he was also a temporary lecturer there in the English department. And we developed a wonderful relationship, which has lasted our lifetime, actually, now. And I know at least I know two of his children, and I engage them in a constructive way from time to time. We have such riches here, you know, that we've created, but I don't think we understand the value of the riches that we create. I think in a society that is obsessed with money, we don't understand what wealth is. Can you talk a little bit about the wealth that we have created in the artistic field, and more particularly the literature that we have given to the world, and what Naipaul has done? Because he paved the way for so many.
I said these tools that he gave to younger writers to use, you know, the value of the techniques that he came up with, that we can't really plumb how deep and how important that is. I don't really want to talk about it in terms of wealth, simply because. So I remember listening to your program and hearing you say that we live in a world that is science and technology dominated, and I like the idea of dominated, because that is precisely what is happening. There is a situation of a seeming situation where science and technology is doing it all. I think, however, that they, so to go back to what Dr. Thorpe was saying yesterday, I think that the humanness of that science and technology is dominating is what the literary field brings. And our writers have done more than many to create that new idea of humanism. So if we go back to Fanon, for instance, and look at how he conceptualized to be human, that we need to talk again about what it means to be human. So in other words, let's go back to what had happened in Europe and their development of an idea of the Enlightenment. And let us do it again, now with this understanding of what oppression and domination is. And if we were to think about it like that, we would see that what our writers have produced is the core that should be, or rather the thing that should be encompassing what science and technology is all about. So that if I were to have a dream at all that I would want to see fulfilled in my own lifetime, is that not just students who are students of literature become familiar with Caribbean literature, but that all students who are going to be graduating from the University of the West Indies should be leaving with some deep understanding, not just surface understanding, but some deep understanding of what Caribbean literature is, how it has grown, what it means now to the world, and to also grasp that because we are not understanding this is ours, and to go back to your sense of wealth, and I would substitute value here for wealth, to not understand the value of that and the right to it that Caribbean people have is not at all a good situation. I think that whether you're a doctor, you're a social worker, because think, for instance, about if a social worker were to carefully read Marlon James's Booker Prize winner, A Brief History of Seven Killings, and how that would help them to understand the inner workings of people who are normally just categorized as, being outside of the pale of social groups, fit only for incarceration kind of thing. Think how that would impact on such workers. So whatever the field, I think that the value of the literature needs to be known. Now, almost every university anywhere is offering courses in Caribbean studies, in Caribbean literature. I think that we need to be aware of that also, and know that it is ours, and that our voices need to be heard most strongly in it.
Yes, no, and I just want to clarify something. When I say wealth, I mean that in a very real way, having to do with value. You see,
Okay.
we understand things here in terms of material, right? So money and what it can buy and purchase, the house we have, the car we have and stuff like that. But wealth is really not that. That may be one element of wealth, but wealth is the sense of self that you have, the sense of a coherence in the society that you live in, the sense of the things created in the society that have value and significance for the society and its identity, but also for the world to engage it. And of course, the intellectual and creative power of the things that the minds that come out of your society and the creative people in your society actually make manifest. And it is in that sense that I meant, when you think of the literature that we have produced just in Trinidad and Tobago from the 1930s to now, really quite significant. When you think of what the Caribbean has been able to produce, and we now have a whole new generation of writers producing this. When you think of the art, the paintings that have flourished in this place, we just lost Leroy Clark, but we have people like Hinkson and others, and we have a set of new painters who are doing it. But we don't have a way in our society, except for the enthusiasm of the people who value these things, generally a small core. We don't have a sense in the society of how this fits into the business of nation building and making. And I don't mean that in a narrow, isolationist, patriotic zeal kind of sense. I just meant from the point of view of identity. And this is more appropriate now as we approach the 59th year of our independence. And soon we are going to be 60 years old, all right? And we are in economic distress. We are in financial trouble. So clearly, we have not, over 60 years, made the kind of progress that we should have made there in terms of sustainability. But in other areas, we have made significant progress. We've made real achievements in the world. People have given value to this country in a way that it's a significant part of our wealth. But being a society that is not sophisticated about this, I'm sorry to say, about things like these, we don't appreciate the value in context and in the context of development. All of these things are so critical to the development process.
Yes, I see where you're coming from with the idea of wealth. So that what you're saying is actually producing money in the coffers. That's what you mean, right?
Yes, you can. It's a leveraging opportunity.
Yes, and it is it's a very good field to get into now as compared to Naipaul's time, where he was saying that he had done 3 books and he didn't know what was going to come next and how he was going to make a way.
He couldn't even get people to publish it.
Yes.
But in a world in which everybody is connected and which diversity has become more and more important, we have something to offer. And I don't think we understand that,
No.
We have something powerful to offer, but we don't understand it. I wonder if I could stop you at this point and ask you to read something from Naipaul. Did you come prepared to do something?
I can certainly do that. What I'd like to read from though is, so a lot of people know the fiction, many people don't know the non-fiction, the creative non-fiction, and I'd like to do a little piece from A Turn in the South.
All right, do that.
Yeah, that's good. So that I think that...
Give people a context first. tell them what,
Right.
succinctly, what A Turn in the South, what that book is about.
Right. So, like all of Naipaul's work, many people have read it in terms of Naipaul exploring himself further and exploring the connections between the Caribbean and the American South. I think it's far more than that. It's, in fact, intended to look at the South and to make a distinction between, because it's always so in Naipaul's work, right? That he's not only reflecting on himself, but he's also looking at what distinguishes others from himself and from our situation. So that in this work of creative nonfiction, that's precisely what he set out to do. Many have followed him since in doing work on the similarities and differences. But I think that where he goes beyond anything that has been done so far, and what I hope more of will be done, is to distinguish between that the American situation is entirely unlike the Caribbean situation, and where we can have empathy and sympathy with what is going on there, we need to be aware of the nuances. So that he deals with social inequities in the South very, very deeply by talking to a variety of people. Interestingly enough, the book starts with somebody who he sees as being, in the terms of housing and on housing that I've been using from the beginning, with somebody who he imagines to be housed, to be at home in the South. And he goes, that's where the journey begins, with that visit to the fellow's home and to finding out what his environment is like. And that introduction leads, like in most of Naipaul work, in a circle through all of the states in the South and an understanding of their situation in relation to himself. Right. So that's the context of it, and I'm just taking a little piece of it.
Let's hear you read now then.
Okay. So I'm doing this because I think that this is one of the examples of the exquisite nuancing of what we're talking about with social inequity. So he calls this part of it the truce with irrational, so that we live with a variety of irrationalities around us, and many of them are about, as many of the people that he interviewed and spoke with for the book, these subtle means and methods that are used constantly by persons in a variety of settings to keep other people in what they imagine their place is. And as you were talking about, I think was in the yesterday interviews, about the ideologically minded who want to position others ideologically as well. And not only in terms of the keeping in place, but how one participates oneself in that remaining in place. So he starts off, of course, with him in place. And this is from the bit that talks about Jackson, Mississippi. And it's from page 189. So he starts off with himself in this piece. At the side of my grandmother's house in central Trinidad, there was a tall gate of corrugated iron on a timber plank frame. This was the main entrance to the house and yard. One of my earliest ideas, when I was 6 or 7, was that there were two worlds, the world within, the world without. To go out of that gate was to be in a world quite different from the one in the house. To go back through that gate at the end of the school day was to shed the ideas of the world outside. And of course, those of us who are familiar with all of Naipaul's work would recall this from a variety of books, right? From A House for Mr. Biswas, from Miguel Street, straight onwards, where the boy narrator has a different experience outside than he has inside. And you see the outside more than the inside, interestingly enough, in that book. So to continue, everyone lives with these ideas. Everyone has different sets of behavior. But in a racially mixed society, especially one where race is a big issue, the different attributes, the different worlds have racial attributes or overtones. Distinctions and differences can have the force of taboos, things sensed rather than consciously worked out. In such a society, participation is different from witness. They engage different sides of the person. And it was with all relief that I put an end to my pleasure in the singing and dancing, where he was present at the time, of the West Jackson Crusade, and returned to the silent healing of the air-conditioned room of the Ramada Renaissance north of the city. So that's a very interesting piece, right? And I can continue to read because he continues to reflect on how the situation of the people he's talking to, how their situations overlap with his and how they are different from his, and how they can find a place where they are, but his pleasures in the place are temporary because he too is participating in constructing the self in order to be in that world, and needs to retreat from the world from time to time in order to refine himself. And I think that's deep and really powerful because it talks about how complicated things can become. And I like the name of the television, the multicultural thing, because how complicated things can become in such circumstances. And how much what we know is not consciously known at all. These things, as you say, are sensed rather than consciously known.
Well,
Yes.
I thank you for the reading, and I thank you for the contribution that you are making to Naipaul and to literature at the University of the West Indies. And perhaps on another occasion we can have a conversation. We have to go now to the news. When I read A Turn in the South, I didn't know it then, but when Trump emerged, I realized that Naipaul had kind of anticipated an emergence of a personality like Trump.
Absolutely.
So it was amazing from that point of view. But, you know, another time. I want to thank you, Dr. Maharaj. I want to thank you for the conversation. And, well, we'll have another conversation on another occasion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thanks to your listeners and viewers.
All right, this is Brighter Morning with Bhoe on MCTV and U97.5 FM radio. We are going to go shortly to the news, but I simply want to close by saying that we celebrated Naipaul's birthday today, although he passed 3 years ago. And the way we did that was that we used an interview that I had done with Naipaul some years ago, 2006. And we had a conversation with Dr. Vijay Maharaj at the University of the West Indies Department of Literatures in English, where she has created an online forum called Lines of Life Naipaul, which can be shared by anyone in Trinidad and Tobago, accessed, and anyone in the world, and to which you can also make a contribution. There are big things happening in the world. I think that the thing that we are most bombarded with these days is what is happening in Afghanistan. We don't have time to talk about that now, but as we close, I want to tell you that that is something we might engage perhaps in a little short perspective sometime during the week. Tomorrow, my guests are, let me tell you who they are. My guests are the Minister of Education, Dr. Nian Gadsby Dolly, and Professor Patrick Watson of the University of the West Indies. So with Dr. Watson, we will be talking, with Professor Watson, we will be talking about the economic challenges in a world of uncertainty for Trinidad and Tobago and the choices we have. And with Dr. Nian Gadsby Dolly, we'll be talking about the education system and how we are going to get kids back to school in September and how our schools going to be operating. Thank you very much for watching. This is Brighter Morning with Bhoe every Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And we go on now to the news. I am Bhoe.